This is de facto the brewing museum for the greater Washington, D.C. area because Heinrich was such a successful brewer, he had half the capacity. And we have this amazing family story here that's all preserved in this wonderful house. My name is Garrett Peck, and I'm an author, historian, and tour guide here in the Washington, D.C. region. And I kind of specialize in Prohibition, jazz history, and of course, brewing history. I wrote kind of the definitive history of brewing in the Washington, D.C. area called Capital Beer, a heady history of brewing in Washington, D.C. I first got involved with the Heinrich Museum about 10 years ago when I was researching a book called Prohibition in Washington, D.C. And it was the very first time I ever took a tour of the house. I just fell in love with it, especially with the downstairs with the German breakfast room, as it's called. And when I started working then a couple years later on Capital Beer, this was obviously the place to go to. The house has a great archive. So the Heinrich House has this fantastic exhibit called Home Brewed, and it's based off of Jack Blush's 40-year collection of Heinrich Breweriana. And one day the executive director, Kim Bender, came up to me and said, so we got this great opportunity, and it's gonna cost a little bit of money to do this, but it's this once-in-a-lifetime collection. And she told me who she wanted to get the collection from, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Kim, you have to get this collection. I mean, there's no other collection like this in the entire world. You couldn't spend 40 years yourself collecting all this great stuff like Jack did. So it's worth the investment in the museum because nothing like this will ever come along again. So Jack agreed to sell the collection here to the Heinrich House, and the house has it now, which is really fantastic. It's over 1,000 pieces of Heinrich Breweriana. It's just absolutely fantastic. And so Kim then asked me and a couple other brewing friends and brewing history friends if we would help out with the initial exhibit. So I got to write one of the panels. I wrote this book called The Great War in America, World War I and its Aftermath. And so I wrote a section about the anti-German hysteria of 1917 and how that affected the Heinrichs. So I'd gone through Amelia Heinrich's diary and also Heinrich's autobiography to talk about that moment in time, 1917, when the Germans were suddenly marginalized, the German Americans were marginalized, and it put a huge amount of pressure upon them. And everyone suddenly wondered, are they going to be traitors to their adopted country, and so on, which they weren't. They were very, very, very proud and very supported the United States against Germany in World War I. But still, there was this wave of panic that went across the country because, of course, the Germans were the single largest ethnic group in the country, period. So it was a lot of concern for a lot of people, and it was way overblown. I mean, the Heinrichs and all the other German Americans were loyal to the country. I think one of the most interesting stories about DC, and this is probably a huge myth that I'm going to blow up here in just a second for a lot of people, but everyone knows, of course, that DC Brow and Port City opened up in 2011, and for so many people, this is when they think that brewing begins in the DC area, which is not true at all. It actually starts in 1770, when a guy from Edinburgh, Scotland arrives named Andrew Wales, and he sets up shop in Old Town Alexandria and then brews there for the next 28 years. So brewing goes back way longer than most people even think. When the Heinrich Brewing Company shut down in 1956, and then we didn't get a brewery again for 55 years later, I think a lot of people simply just forgot that DC was once a beer town, but we've always been a beer town. So it's really cool to see this more recent resurgence of brewing, but historically, beer has always been here.